Global Climate Change. Professor V. Ramanathan of Scripps Institution of Oceanography is the man generally credited with the discovery of the phenomenon of global warming, correctly predicting in the early 1970s that there would be a measurable increase in the temperature of the Earth's atmosphere by 1980. I was happy to make the 200-mile trek down to La Jolla to speak with Ram, as he likes to be called, in his laboratory. Craig Shields, I thank you so much for having me here. Maybe we could start with the early days. Could you take us back there and tell us what it was like? Dr. Ramanathan, I was fresh out of graduate school. Earlier, I had studied the atmospheres of Mars and Venus, and for my PhD, I wanted to switch to looking at the more pertinent environment, something more relevant. At that time my main interest was carbon dioxide, which comes from fossil fuel combustion, and how much it was contributing to so-called global warming. There was a paper that was looking at the effect of chlorofluorocarbons that pointed out that CFCs would go into the atmosphere and destroy the ozone layer. This paper ultimately won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry, and I became interested to see if they had a greenhouse effect. And to my surprise I found that one molecule of CFC had the same global warming effect as adding 10,000 molecules of carbon dioxide. My paper was published in 1975, and it was met with skepticism and disbelief. It took scientists 5 or 10 years to redo my work and convince themselves that, yes, this was a major issue. But in any case, the discovery of the greenhouse effect of chlorofluorocarbons had opened Pandora's box. Soon, other scientists and I discovered that a whole host of gases we are letting loose in the atmosphere are probably more urgent than what we thought about CO2 increase. So I got curious, and in 1980 I published a paper along with another famous meteorologist, Robert Patton, in which we concluded that if the hypothesis or theory of global warming was correct, we should see this warming by the year 2000. And of course a team of over 1,000 scientists in 2001 agreed with the idea of global warming from greenhouse gases, and the prediction was confirmed. That was good for the science, but not good for the planet because it continues to get worse. From the time I first published my paper and we discovered this greenhouse warming in the atmosphere, we had released billions and billions of tons of these greenhouse gases. Yes, I understand that the oil companies are still spending money trying to discredit this. Do you ever feel personally attacked? VR, no, it was not an issue of a personal attack. When you publish an idea, people have to be able to repeat what you did and have to be able to see the effects in the atmosphere. I feel more sad that the planet is heating, and that the warming you've seen is much larger than even I had predicted. In fact, this early warning is being ignored. We are still just dumping pollutants, with enormous disastrous consequences 20 or 30 years from now. You are not talking about something that is just going to happen in 200 years. You are talking about something that will happen in 20 or 30 years. So this is the time to do something, not to be bickering. That is what makes me sad. We are losing valuable time to fix the problem. Yes. We are just a week or so away from Copenhagen. What should a rational mind think going into Copenhagen? Do we have reason to be optimistic about people coming together and stopping the bickering, or do you think that this is going to be an exercise in verbosity for its own sake? VR, the good thing is that almost all the leaders, including those from the developed and developing nations, agree that we have to do something and we have to do it now. The issue with the leaders is that everyone is waiting for somebody else to take the lead. The developing nations tell us, you cause this, you fix it, And the developed nations are telling developing nations, unless you join us we are not going to do it. So in a sense that is the issue, but at least we are past the first major hurdle that everyone accepts it is a major problem. And if we do not fix it then it will have disastrous consequences. So we are past that hump at least. Yes, I think most of us are. I was telling a friend the other day that if you had asked 100 people a year ago what degree of credibility the concept of global climate change has in their mind, you would have batted about 99 out of 100. I am not so sure that is true today. I think there are a significant number of people who actually doubt the hypothesis of global warming. That is true. I think it led to a crescendo a year or two ago, and now we seem to be siding a little bit more with the skeptics. It is a problem and I cannot deny that. But why is it happening? I think it is economic catastrophes. People can only take so much bad news. It's hard to know how much the propaganda of the oil industry is hurting this, but I see some commercial advertisements on TV by the oil industry promoting alternate energy. But I think the key thing is that I have not seen one leader get up and say, no, we don't have to worry about it. At least we are past that stage. But we need enormous education for the public. That has to happen. Yes, I read a couple of the articles on your website and I am interested in this phenomenon of runaway events. So for instance, the likelihood that we are going to lose the permafrost, which is burying the methane. Could you comment on runaway events like that and others and the probabilities that are assigned to those? In particular, I've read papers that are extremely precise about the probability of a certain specific phenomenon. I am wondering how can someone assign, with any real certainty, a probability associated with a one-time event in natural and geologic history. Let us take the situation where we just continue dumping these gases at the same rate we have been doing. My own work suggests in less than 30 to 40 years we will cross the threshold of 2 degrees Celsius warming. The planet has already warmed about 3/4 of a degree. So if it crosses this 2-degree threshold, or in Fahrenheit it is working on close to a 3.5-degree threshold, I expect to see major iconic changes in the planet. For example, the first to go is the Arctic summer sea ice. The Earth would look bluish, not white, when you look from space into the polar region. Now that has got a huge impact on the ecosystem, on temperatures, on global warming, etc. The second major disastrous thing, you can think of climate tipping points in what is happening, is the melting of the Himalayan glaciers. Those glaciers provide the headwater for all the major river systems in Asia. 3 billion people depend on that. And the third is the permafrost, as you mentioned, evaporating, melting away and exposing the methane. These all one by one will create the climate tipping point, with major disastrous consequences. At this stage, our understanding of this is not such that we can say definitively what is going to happen. Yet, we can give a probability of these things happening and there is at least a 50% probability that any and all of this can happen if we pass that 2-degree threshold. Is this specifically tied to 385 parts per million CO2? In your estimation, is there a specific level of CO2 that would trigger one of these events, or do you think this fixation on CO2 levels is too narrow? The first thing I need to point out is that CO2 causes about 50% of the trouble. The other 50% comes from other gases like methane. We talked about fluorocarbons, nitrous oxide which comes from fertilizer, and black carbon. So I do not see it as an issue of just limiting CO2. We need to look at the whole picture. And the carbon dioxide concentration is already 380 parts per million. So we are already there, and so an answer to your question is 385 narrow. My first answer is that 380 does not tell us what else is going on. We have to reduce CO2, but we also have to reduce the cause of pollution in other gases. And even if Copenhagen succeeds in cutting down the CO2 emissions by 50%, the carbon dioxide concentration will exceed 400 parts per million. So we are already going to be past all these thresholds. So the question then is, what can we do? There are so many short-lived greenhouse gases. Some of us are promoting so-called fast-track action. Just to give an example, one of the greenhouse gases is ozone. Its lifetime is only a month, so if we cut down the emission of the gases which lead to ozone, they're gone within a few months. So we can do a lot of things, and not be blindsided by just focusing on carbon dioxide. We have to cut down on CO2. Do not get me wrong on that. But that is not going to save us from exceeding this 2-degree threshold. We have to cut other greenhouse gases too. Yes, I am interested in masking and enhancing effects, that is, in phenomena that serve to speed the warming process up or slow it down. So we have aerosol, soot, and so forth. We have components in the atmosphere that your UAV, unmanned aerial vehicle, project is attempting to quantify. What would you say is the net of all these masking effects? VR, it is best to think of the greenhouse gases as a blanket. Just like as a blanket traps our body heat and keeps us warm, this blanket of greenhouse gases traps the heat coming from the sun. Some of these particles in the atmosphere function to warm or to cool. We really do not know the true nature of the beast in terms of a greenhouse blanket because of the amounts. Yes, but your guess is what? If you were a betting man and you were saying, I bet that the totality of the mirror effect and the enhancing effect, the black body effect, call it what you will, is what? VR. My own estimates show these mirrors have masked about 50% of the warming effect by the blanket. So when we clean up the air and get rid of the minerals, the warming we will see will be at least 2 degrees already. Yes, okay. Obviously renewable energy sounds like a good thing, especially based on this conversation. But I would think burning, even biofuels, would be an inferior solution to solar or wind, or geothermal, etc. I would think if you had the choice between solar thermal and biofuels, you would choose the former every day because the latter burns hydrocarbons. Talk to me, if you would, about renewable energy and where would you like to see us go? Maybe take this on a continent-by-continent basis. There might be something different we need to do in North America versus, say, Europe or Asia. VR. Solar to me is a logical first choice, and I can give you a personal example. I switched my home to solar completely. And it will pay back in 8 years, and then the rest of the fuel that it produces is free. So I do not see the argument that solar is costly. It is there now. The problem is solar is not going to work in Alaska. So I would say certain latitude regions, between 40 degrees north and 40 degrees south, solar is there. The main problem with that is the capital cost. For example, for a home like mine, it was $14,000, and that is a lot of money for some folks. And solar is stationary. It is not going to solve the transportation issue. We need a whole array of solutions. I would say for power generation I would go for solar all the way. I have understood the argument that it is expensive. An issue with solar is storage. How do you store the energy? And as far as biofuel is concerned, Things like corn ethanol is a disaster, simply because you have to grow corn first, which means you need water. You are coupling energy with water. You do not want to do that. Then you have to use fertilizers, and that produces other greenhouse gases. The most promising thing with biofuel is the marine algae, but that technology is not there. And sometime in the future, whether that future is 2 years from now or 20 years from now, we will see. There are some solutions we could start. Energy efficiency is clearly a logical choice. I think we have gone past the time when we could say, I will choose one. That luxury is gone. We are losing time. CS, I can hear the passion in your voice. And I understand it completely. Here you have 6.8 billion people whose lives are at stake. Tell us a little bit about the emotion with which you approach this subject. VR, I spent the last 35 years working on the science. And my work was producing one bad piece of news after the other. And a few years ago I decided I had to become part of the solution, not part of the problem. So first off, that is reducing my own carbon footprint. I know it is difficult. It is not easy because we are all addicted to fossil fuel. On the solution side, I discovered just starting to work on this. Fortunately, it is not too late. We can and must do a lot of things. Just to give you one simple idea I am pursuing, roughly 3 billion people in the world have no access to fossil fuels, so they are basically burning wood and firewood, which releases a lot of carbon dioxide, greenhouse gases, and other forms of black carbon. So it turns out that giving them access to cleaner fuel and cleaner ways of cooking would save a tremendous amount of these climate change pollutants. So the solution is there. We have stuff that does not pollute. There are a number of these solutions waiting out there, what I call low-hanging fruit, and we have got to go for that. CS, excellent. We have talked about this a little bit before. Chevron famously goes on television and says, imagine an oil company being part of the solution. Well, I am sorry, I cannot. I flat out do not believe that. What do you think, if you do not mind making kind of a quasi-political statement? VR, interestingly enough, I've written papers on global warming which, of course, no one knew about until 20 to 30 years ago. I know the attitude the oil industry took was extremely skeptical and negative. Now, take the example of Chevron, advertising they are part of the solution. The message I take from that is they are admitting climate change is a big problem. So to me, that is the first mental leap they have already taken. Whether that was mentioned in a positive or negative sense I cannot guess. I am not a psychologist or a psychiatrist. But I get excited when I see that ad. This is an oil company admitting climate change is a problem and they are part of the solution. So we have passed a major hurdle with them. CS, great stuff. You have been at this now for decades. I try to learn about some of the major breakthroughs. From an academic standpoint, from a research standpoint, where are you taking this over the coming years? What would you like to accomplish at this point? VR, if you look at the focus of Copenhagen and most of the climate committee, they are focusing on the long term. If we go on this route, there is no doubt we are driving towards a precipice. But I am focusing more on the immediate future, 20 or 30 years, and to me, my work suggests we are going to pass that 2-degree threshold. For me that is already a precipice, and I am trying to extend that time. Instead of heading for 2 degrees in 30 years, I am trying to push that time to 60 or 70 years. That is my sole focus, simply because I feel we have to believe in the innovation of human beings. CS, thanks so much Dr. Ramanathan. It was a great honor to have met you. For more information on this contributor, please visit http://2greenenergy.com/ renewable-energy-facts-fantasies/